for each. A booth is like a little kind of altar place or something. One for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for Jesus. This is what we should do, right? Make a booth for what's that about, right? They weren't sure what's going on, right? But they had a joint spiritual experience. There are at least 2 occasions where, surrounding Jesus, people have, or several occasions actually, when we look at the resurrection, joint spiritual experiences. Now, mostly spiritual experiences are individual, aren't they, right? Somebody says to you, I had an amazing experience last night, right? When I was praying, I saw Jesus. And you think, oh, good, wonderful. And inside you're thinking, lucky you, right? You saw Jesus, right? I didn't see Jesus, but that's wonderful. I'm happy for you. You saw Jesus, right? So people have this experience. Or, they see their deceased grandmother standing at the foot of their bed, and she says something to them, and they know this is, they come tell you this excited story because I saw my grandmother, There she was, as real as anything. Wonderful. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for you. But it's not so common that people have joint spiritual experiences, is it? My personal view is I wonder, after 2013, if this kind of thing starts happening. What do you think? Joint spiritual experiences? Yeah. I wonder. Because we talk about the coming together of spiritual world and physical world. As long as it's just individual experiences, it's very easy to be skeptical. But when more than one person has it together, I don't know, it's a personal view, so don't take it any other way. But this was a heightened time of spiritual activity, right? And it's such a crucial time in Jesus' mission. Things are going badly. Now Moses and Elijah meet with him and talk with him. They're saying that from now, the course that you're going has to change. You will have to go a way of suffering, go to Jerusalem, possibly be killed or executed, and have to give your life as a living sacrifice that way. It becomes clear to Jesus he has to go this route. So it's a change of course. And this is evidenced by what Jesus says to his disciples. So this is already quite advanced in his public ministry. Matthew 16, in chapter 16, it says, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things. So he begins to show them. Before that, he'd never shown them, right? They didn't expect this at all. He must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. So he's sharing with them now, this is going to be the course, this is going to be the route that I have to go from now on. And how do the disciples react? Peter, the named disciple, takes Jesus and begins to rebuke him, to tell him off. Say, how can you say this? God forbid, Lord, this shall never happen to you. What are you talking about? It shows that he doesn't expect this to happen at all, right? It's not in his thinking the Messiah comes to suffer and to give his life this way. If that were Jesus' intention from the beginning, and God's plan from the beginning, do you think Jesus would share it with Peter along the way somewhere? It's this change of course, it becomes necessary. This direct kind of kingdom-building project is not possible in his lifetime. He has to go this way, as we will see. We call it spiritual salvation, and it relates to 2 possible courses that Jesus can go. This again is a very kind of clear understanding or revelation from divine principle, putting into context, understanding that we've had up to now, not saying that what we believed in the past was wrong, but now we can know more fully what could have happened if Jesus had been accepted, if John the Baptist had been successful. So if he's accepted by the Jewish people, these prophecies we read about Isaiah echoed in the Gabriel's message to Mary, we see these prophecies coming true. He becomes a Lord of glory, like a King of kings. The symbol of his Reformed Judaism, whatever it would be called, this movement surrounding Jesus would have been the crown, because he came as a King of Kings on the throne of David, had government over this kingdom forever. But if he's not accepted by the Jewish people, rejected, means he's going to fulfill those prophecies, those warning prophecies of Isaiah 53. It talks about the suffering servant. He has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. He received the stripes and the wounds for our transgressions. It's this kind of idea of a suffering lamb. Very painful verses, which is, in a way, not predicting the future, because prophecies don't predict the future. They just provide a warning. If you do God's will, this will happen. If you don't do God's will, watch out, this will happen. So prophecy is like a warning to people. And the correct response, of course, is to discern God's will and do God's will. What should we be doing to do God's will? Believe in him whom he has sent. So it's very plain. This is what Jesus needs. Otherwise he ends, as was tragically the circumstances, he becomes the Lord of suffering. And the cross becomes a symbol of the movement that emanates out of Jesus' sacrifice. It builds amazingly into a worldwide movement called Christianity from this beginning. An extraordinary accomplishment, absolutely by God's power and by God's involvement. But Jesus kind of warned people, even prior to this, that such an end could come. He told a parable of the tenants, the wicked tenants. You can read this in Matthew 21. But in this story, he gives a whole analogy of the situation of Israel. The landlord is in this story representing God. The tenants are Israel. They're just minding this territory that is God's territory, right? They're just kind of given the task of looking after this nation of Israel. God's servants, which are the master, the absent master, sends his servants to collect the money from the sale of the vineyard and the fruit and the harvest. And when he sends his servants to collect the money, they are beaten and they are stoned. So he sends more servants and they're stoned. The Jewish people would understand this is the treatment we gave the prophets, right? The prophets often had an uncomfortable message and they were mistreated. Right? So God is sending the prophets and they're mistreated. And then he says, the absentee landlord says, well, surely if I send my son, they will respect my son. So he sends his son to collect the money from the vineyard. And they seize upon the son. They say, this is our opportunity. We're going to kill him and get his inheritance. What wicked people, right? Wicked people. They should be offering up the fruit of their labors to the landowner. But they didn't do that. They seize his son and kill him. And then Jesus says, what do you think the master will do to these wicked tenants? And everybody who's listening to this story around him says, oh, he will kill them. He will put them to a miserable death, right? Because they've done something terrible. And he says, truly I say to you, the fruit will be taken away from this nation and given to another nation, producing the fruits of it. He's warning Israel that if you reject the Son, which of course is himself, if you reject the Son, then this blessing which has been yours will be taken away from you and given to somebody else. They don't like that. At the end of this little story, it has the Pharisees saying that they're thinking now, because they recognize he's talking about them, they get together and they plot. They think, how can we get rid of him? How can we get rid of this person, Jesus? Get him out of the way. But they say, well, we won't do anything now. Why? Because he has a lot of support. He's very popular. People regard him as a prophet. So it's a bit dangerous. We don't want the crowd to come against us. So they're weighing up their position, right? Thinking, shall we? When will we move in? When will we arrest him? When will we find something that we can pin on him to make him look like a criminal and get him out of the way? So Jesus knew what was going to happen. He knew, and going in his final journey into Jerusalem, that he was going to suffer. He was going to face a false trial. It was already decided ahead of time that he was guilty. And he was going to be handed over and given severe punishment, death. Even so, this is celebrated again in the Christian calendar, the Palm Sunday, Jesus is coming in a kind of triumphal way on a donkey. He's coming in. Certain residences there that people would recognize, and people are waving branches. This is how they do when they welcome a great dignitary or king coming into the city. The biggest thing you can find around a wave is a palm branch, right? So you wave that. And there's enough people to do that, to make a kind of triumphal entry. It shows that people has popular support among ordinary people. But he's heading towards the temple. On the way he raises Lazarus from the dead. he's healing people, he's still in that role and working to exercise God's power. And he goes to Jerusalem, he goes to the temple, he disputes with the religious leaders, and he engages in what is called the cleansing of the temple. Do you remember that? He goes to this holy place and he sees that there are tables around there where people are buying and selling things, all the chickens or whatever for the sacrifices. And because it's an international center now, right, then there are money changers, right? And money changers have all their piles of different coins on their table. Now, what's the most annoying thing you can do to a money changer? You take this table, right? I won't do it with this one. You take this table and you go whoosh, right? And you throw the whole thing, and the coins scatter everywhere, and they all mix up. And they're going crazy, right? Trying to pick these things up. And he does it to one, and then another, and then another. Actually, this is not the way to really engage people and win friends and, you know, get some info. He knows it. That time is past, actually. So somewhere he's letting out perhaps a righteous anger, a righteous indignation, because he's come now, the person who is a substantial temple, comes into the temple and he sees people defiling this temple, just there buying and selling, just there, you know, making money for themselves, right? Their own little businesses in this holy place. And he says very poignantly, at the end of that little story, it says, "Do you not know that this is to be a house of prayer for all nations?" Isn't that a beautiful expression? He says, "Do you not know this should be a house of prayer for all nations?" It's like an international peace palace, right? It should be treated that way and revered that way. People couldn't revere and respect the temple, means what are they going to do to Jesus? Right? This is why. It's a correlation there. It's like violating his body already. And that is what is going to happen as he goes towards his final days. The high priest determines to kill him. We see that, amazingly, there are efforts of the spirit world to try and help Jesus. Pilate's wife, the Roman procurator's wife, has a dream in which she realizes that Jesus is innocent and asks her husband to release him. But he says, "No, I wash my hands. I don't want anything to do with this. Right? It's not my decision. I don't want people to accuse me for doing one way or the other." You know, but even God is trying to influence through such a route. Just prior to his journey to Jerusalem, this is where Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane. If you go to Jerusalem today, you can see the Garden of Gethsemane there. Olive trees that date back very possibly to that time or shortly after. Very ancient trees in that small patch of ground, looks across a small valley to the gate of Jerusalem. It's just there. Interestingly, in one of those trees, you can still see where on his first visit there, true Father hammered in 3 nails into one tree. Being in great agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down onto the ground. He's praying so sincerely that his sweat is like mixed with blood. The blood vessels are bursting on his head. And he asks his disciples to pray with him, Peter, James, and John. He says, "Pray with me." When he turns around, what's happened? They're asleep. It means they don't really understand. Remember, earlier I said it's a kind of phenomenon of our spiritual life. It's like we know but we don't know. So the disciples knew he was the Messiah, but they didn't really know. Right? They could not even do the simple thing that he asked them to do, pray with me. And then he said, "I don't mind if you don't pray, just stay awake. Just stay awake." Have that kind of support around him at this moment. But they couldn't do that either. Right? So we have to think about this. It's very serious. Jesus is left isolated and vulnerable and alone. But he's praying that this cup of death will not come his way. It will pass from him. Traditionally, people have looked at that and they've said that, oh, this is Jesus' human side. He's praying out of human weakness. Nobody wants to die. He didn't want to die. So he's saying, "Father, let this cup of death pass from me." But look how he's praying with drops of blood coming from his brow. He has a different mind altogether. And as the principle says, if Jesus had, if it had been the case that by sacrificing himself, the kingdom of heaven could have come, I'm sure he would have made that sacrifice. In human history, there are many people who make that ultimate sacrifice for their country, to defend their family, for some cause. It's of course no way easy to do, but there are people who would do that. And would Jesus do that? Is he a lesser person than those? Not at all. But he knows that his being hounded out of this world and crucified is very, very serious. The consequences are very serious. So he says, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. If this is the way it has to be, I'll go this way. And he prays 3 times that way. Why did Jesus not want to die? We can give certain reasons according to this principal explanation. We could say he understood God's providence very clearly and didn't want God's heart to be broken again. The biggest tragedy for God was the fall of Adam and Eve. The second tragedy compounding that was when Cain killed Abel. You can say from this point of view, the crucifixion of Jesus was this third great tragedy. It's of that order. He didn't want God's heart to be broken again by seeing his son go through this kind of suffering. He wanted to bring complete salvation to his followers through living and fulfilling the 3 blessings and bringing the kingdom of heaven in his lifetime. And he knew that, as the kind of religious leader, his followers would suffer his pattern. They would go the way of suffering if he did. He knew this, and that is exactly what happened. Right? Of all Jesus' disciples, only one died a natural death. All the others were martyred or executed. Right? Even Paul, we don't know quite how Paul ended his life, but it's most likely he was executed in Rome. Right? Such a great man, such great men and women, but they met this kind of death following Jesus. He knew that the chosen people of Israel, they'd suffered so much already, by going this route would face more suffering. Because it's spiritual law. He understood the spiritual law at work, right? So it was very plain to him. He wanted to avoid this for the sake of his beloved nation and his people. But he is betrayed. And tragically, he's betrayed by one of his disciples, right? You can see that this is likely to happen. He sees inside people's hearts and their minds, and he sees the possibility that somebody, even at that Last Supper, where they share a meal together, he says, one of you is going to betray me. All the disciples around, they say, is it me? Is it me? Is it going to be me? Surely it's not. Of course they know if it's going to be them, right? They know it's going to be them. The person who eventually does it knows who it is, right? This is Judas. What does Jesus say about Judas, who betrayed Jesus? He identified Jesus to the Roman guards, who then took him away, because they didn't know who Jesus was. They came to arrest Jesus, but they didn't know who he was. To their eyes, he looked like anybody else. Somebody had to point them out to him, and they had paid Judas 30 pieces of silver to go out to Jesus and kiss him. The sign was going to be a kiss. How ironic, right? The person I go up to and kiss on the cheek, this is the person that you're looking for, and you can arrest and you can take away and execute. So something serious was going on there, right? So Judas identifies Jesus with this kiss. Jesus is arrested. After that, what does Jesus say about Judas? He says, woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had never been born. Now that's a pretty strong thing to say about somebody, isn't it? And if the Messiah says that about you, don't you think you'll be shaking in your boots? Right? If the Messiah says it would be better if you'd never been born, that shows how serious it was. The betrayal of Jesus leading to his execution. Right? If this had been part of God's original will, then maybe Jesus has some function in that. But very clearly, not from Jesus' point of view. This is very, very serious. Judas, this is how the fallen nature works, isn't it? As soon as he's done this, he realizes with remorse the severity of what he's done, and he goes off and he hangs himself. Right? He realizes, I should never have done that. So he kills himself. And that place where he dies becomes called the field of blood, etc. So the story is there. Jesus is betrayed. The disciples, at this time of Jesus' arrest, they run away. They escape. Even Peter, his closest disciple, according to the prophecy of Jesus, he says, you will deny me 3 times before the cock crows in the morning. And he says, surely I wouldn't do that. I'll never do that. But lo and behold, he does. He's approached by Roman guards and they say, do you know this person Jesus? He says, no. And they say, are you sure? We saw you with him. Aren't you with that cult, that sect of Jesus? He says no. 3 times he says no. I don't know the man. Protect himself. Right? And then the cock crows and he remembers Jesus' words. I've done it. I've done it. Right? It's like he knew who Jesus was, but he didn't know enough to put himself in that position. There's some kind of understanding that if Jesus had had people around him who were willing to die in his place, he wouldn't have to die. You know, the Romans exercising this justice, they were pretty brutal, right? The Romans, if a crime had been committed, they wanted somebody punished. And sometimes they weren't so worried who that was. It was the person who committed the crime or not. We just need somebody punished for this, because it's a sign to everybody else. You know? Who's in charge? So they weren't so concerned with Jesus innocent or not. It wasn't right. It's just another one to nail up on a cross. But tragically, he went through this unfair trial, and this suffering servant prophecy is fulfilled. He's despised, rejected by men. He has to suffer this kind of whipping and scourging, as it's called, a leather thong with metal bolts on the end, which tear into the flesh. So he has to go through that experience, weakened so much by that, he can't even lift the cross, as is, you know, the kind of procedure. The person to be nailed on the cross has to carry their own cross, very heavy cross, to that site, for extra humiliation and identification with their so-called crime. And Simon Cyrene steps in and carries the cross for the weakened Jesus. And he dies on the cross. Those who passed by, it says, derided him. They mocked him. They were wagging their heads and saying, you would destroy the temple and build it up in 3 days? Save yourself. Come down and save yourself. They're laughing at him. The Roman soldiers are casting dice, right, to see who will get his garments, his meager garments. Is it you or me? Who's going to get these? It's shameful. It's the kind of shameful face of humanity emerging at this time. And just on a distant hill, watching this scene, are the faithful women, not spoken so much of in the biblical records, but they're really attending and concerned for their Lord, weeping, I'm sure, when they see this happen to the one that they love so much. And from his last words, he says, Father, forgive them. On the cross, he asks God, forgive these people, for they know not what they do. They don't know what they're doing, right? You're familiar with this phrase. So this is one of the last words from the cross of Jesus. What this indicates, if you look at what Jesus is saying here, he's talking to his Heavenly Father. Almost, it's like trying to change Heavenly Father's mind. Like God is full of righteous anger. Maybe he wants to condemn people for what they have done. But he's saying, Father, forgive them. In other words, have mercy on these people. He's acting in this mediator role, last, right? The mediator between the people. So they, in their ignorance, will not suffer God's retribution, but rather will be forgiven. And that is his heart. His extraordinary heart actually brings about the victory over death and the complete surrender of Satan at this moment, as far as Jesus' Spirit is concerned. So on the cross he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? So he feels poignantly at this moment, maybe the first time in his life, it's like the Spirit of God leaves him. Why have you forsaken me? He's crying out, like God's Spirit has left him. Why has God's Spirit left him? Nobody's really understood before. We can only understand, and this is Father's deep insight into restoration. In the original Garden of Eden, then Adam left God by his own choice. He allowed that to happen. So someone representing Adam has to come back to God and stand in the position of being abandoned by God, but be true to God and faithful to God, and not have any resentment in his heart even to those who are persecuting him and nailing him to this cross in what is an excruciatingly painful death. But still he keeps this mind, he keeps this heart And from that position of God having to step away, because if God didn't step away, then Satan would say, oh, no, he could survive this because you were with him all the time. It's always coming under Satan's accusation. But to gain the voluntary submission of Satan, he has to do something that Satan could never do. And he shows himself touchless, blameless. Satan can't touch him in this respect. His spirit is absolutely free to go to God. Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And then on that basis, Jesus can resurrect. It said in 1 Corinthians, if Christ had not been raised, then your faith is futile and still you are in your sins. Right? So the principle affirms absolutely through the sacrifice of Jesus comes our redemption, comes the possibility for spiritual salvation, and this is a victory over death on the cross, as has always been understood by Christianity. But what is the principle adding? It's adding this fact that this is a tragic and necessary secondary course of Jesus. He should have been accepted. He should have had people unite with him and allow him to carry on a very long and productive life, right? And die a natural death and have family and descendants which would have populated the earth. And in this way, we say this is complete salvation, restoring both aspects of the fall, the spiritual fall and the physical fall. That means the Messiah will bring physical salvation through his family and an engrafting process of children of his disciples being married to children in his lineage, so that the bloodline is cleansed and sin is no more. Satan has no more hold on the lineage of humanity, but we can be grafted into God's lineage. Tragically, because of this sacrifice, losing his body, then it's just a spiritual salvation is offered. We'll look at this more when we talk about Christology tomorrow. But it does leave the physical bodies of people vulnerable. This is why Paul in Romans 7, and was Paul a saved Christian?
Yes.
Yes, of course he was a saved Christian. Right? Great saint, right? Holy man, amazing person. A man of God, a person who saw in himself still, faults that he wanted to get rid of, because the higher you go spiritually, the more acutely you see those things, actually. If you're low spiritually, you think everything's fine with you, right? So don't worry, if you start to feel you're seeing more faults in yourself than you imagined, it actually means you're growing spiritually, right? Taking off another layer, all right? I said to myself, right? But Paul said, I delight in the law of God, in my inmost self, but I see in my members another law, at war with the law of my mind, making me captive to the law of sin, which dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am. So he's saying, I'm still captive to this through my physical body. So this means there's something left undone. This is the aspect of physical salvation. And it's still waiting. It's the reason why the Messiah has to come again, to complete this task. So, this is, just to close with, this is Paul's words as well. He said, we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit. He was amongst those who, as saved Christians, were the first kind of crop of this work of the resurrected Jesus, who would die and be able to go to paradise, to be, through their faith, united with Jesus once again. But he says we groan inwardly as we wait for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. That work is left undone. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. God bless you.